During his vacation in Mexico, Houston native Danny Boulder yearned to engage meaningfully with the local culture, opting for less frequented towns and locales for his exploration. Little did he know that this journey would result in him forming a bond with his future best mate. Danny crossed paths with a frail stray feline during his travels, creating an immediate bond between them. Much to his shock, upon his arrival back home with the feline, the vet felt obliged to reach out to the authorities. Despite being an ardent animal enthusiast, the demise of his cat due to age compelled him to refrain from adopting another pet. He discovered that pet ownership significantly complicated traveling arrangements. Saddened but alone, his attention shifted towards arranging his lone trip to Mexico, intending to plunge headfirst into novel encounters. Fueled by his desire for authenticity, Danny began his very first trip to the nation with vigor and curiosity. He drove into Mexico, eager to uncover the uniqueness of tranquil villages neighboring the border. He found the folks he met intriguing, but a weak stray cat ignited his compassion. Along a bustling road, Danny spotted an emaciated feline. Upon coming closer, the famished creature scampered towards him. Stricken by the pitiful state of the kitten, Danny instantly decided to provide for it. The kitten seemed to be yearning for love and nourishment, besides a portable dwelling for their upcoming journey. Before we continue, feel free to support us by hitting like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell. That helps immensely. Now back to the story. Danny geared himself up to meet the needs of the kitten, considering the lap of the journey they still had to cover. He resolved to nurture the tiny creature, not disregarding the potential difficulties he might face. As he ambled along local streets, the inhabitants began eyeing him and cautioned him about the situation. Unfortunately, the language barrier left Danny in the dark about their warnings. It was quite evident that the feline required more than just sustenance, but also required medical attention. Danny still had unwrapped chapters in his Mexico diary, but the kitten's state of health called for his first response. Two options lay before Danny: finding a local animal rescue for the kitten or taking matters into his own hands. Despite the understanding that the latter was a challenging option, Danny felt an inexplicable bond with the kitten, almost like a predestined acquaintance. The mere thought of separating from the creature was too bitter for him to bear. Consequently, Danny decided to step up and act by buying more cat food, few bowls, and a portable carrier for their imminent journey. Danny had everything set up to guarantee the young cat's ease in their joint journey. His resolve was unshakable. He wanted to make the feline a part of his existence. Despite any potential hurdles, Danny had faith that the ultimate care for the young cat could come from the United States. He understood that the way he treated stray animals was different from the norm, as evidenced by the locals' responses. Regardless of the difficulties this choice might bring, Danny was bent on bringing the young cat to his residence. Regrettably, he didn't possess the cat's official paperwork. Nonetheless, he was optimistic that the immigration officers wouldn't probe too much into it. Luckily, his progress through the various checkpoints was devoid of any hitches. Whenever someone questioned about the kitten, Danny casually stated that they were journeying across the globe together, which was satisfactory. The immigration officials conversed briefly in Spanish and let Danny and his young cat through. Startled by the simplicity of the whole process, Danny felt confident that the cat was destined to stay with him. As he journeyed from the Mexican border back to his residence, he contemplated his future travel plans and the integration of the new kitten into his exploits. The simplest choice, he thought, would be to leave the kitten at his residence. Somehow that didn't seem apt. The circumstances of his first encounter with the kitten left him uneasy. Inspired by a recent story of a cat going on worldwide adventure with its owner through Border Paw Patrol, Danny decided to officially adopt the young cat as soon as he got back to his residence. His initial move was to contact a vet expert in processing animal travel paperwork. To ensure that he could travel globally with his new furry friend without any issue, he meticulously arranged all the necessary vet appointments. His heart swelled with joy as the adoption of his stray kitten was finalized. He had bought all the essential cat toys and care equipment. Everything fit together quickly and seamlessly. Though slightly underweight, Missy adapted well to her new environment and started feeding regularly. Even though she was on the lean side, she was settling in pretty well. Danny was glad to see her steadily gaining weight and growing more comfortable in her surroundings. In the midst of all these preparations, it dawned on him that he hadn't named the young cat yet. On impulse, he decided to name her Missy. It seemed to suit her perfectly as he began calling her by the new name. They built a comfortable daily rhythm, and all seemed well until Danny returned to Houston. At that point, he began to ascertain an alteration in Missy's conduct. What initially appeared as regular kitten antics translated into unanticipated instances of hostility. Unexpectedly, Missy would latch onto Danny and bite him without any clear motive. Being an experienced cat owner, Danny identified this behavior as abnormal. Danny's new cat, Missy, showed unusually hostile behavior, biting with more intensity than any other cat previously under his care. Fast forward a week, Missy's aggression levels had risen to such an extent that Danny had to wear gloves for defense. The transformation was quite drastic, creating a real struggle when placing her into a carrier for a checkup at the vet's. Danny was cognizant of the strain Missy was going through, but the importance of getting her immunization shots could not be overstated. As they journeyed by car, Missy displayed more hostility, growling and scratching persistently at her carrier. A direct contrast to her tranquil demeanor during an earlier trip from Mexico to Houston. This abrupt escalation in hostility made Danny apprehensive. He was afraid his handling could have unintentionally stirred this alteration, and he was relieved to have a professional vet examine Missy and give some insight into this sudden character change. As Danny anxiously awaited his turn, Missy continued to struggle aggressively within her carrier. The moment his name was called, Danny felt a tide of release surge through him. He conveyed to the veterinarian the story of how Missy became part of his life, who subsequently decided a detailed health check was crucial. Throughout the examination, Danny noticed that the vet seemed somewhat elusive, offering only vague answers to his numerous questions. But the mood altered when Danny asked about acquiring transit documents for the little feline. The vet's reaction was instant, with his eyebrows raising abruptly, followed by a hasty departure from the room. Re-entering 5 minutes later, the vet strongly recommended against any travel for Missy, stating that she was in a state of shock and terribly malnourished. Necessary treatments were prescribed for her recovery. Missy's recovery plan included some prescribed medication and a revisit after a month. Danny was taken aback by this unexpected development, since he had never experienced problems acquiring travel paperwork for his pets in the past. Usually the procedure was straightforward and uncomplicated. However, being concerned about his pet Missy's well-being, Danny decided to adhere to the vet's suggestions. Once he was back at his home, he started giving the medication to Missy, although it proved more difficult than he initially thought. Post their trip to the animal doctors, the tiny feline started exhibiting more aggressive behavior, often clawing and biting Danny until he was covered in scars. On the third day of dealing with this situation, things took a surprising turn. In the early hours of the morning, Danny was startled by an urgent, loud banging at his door. The hammering soon escalated into a persistent thudding, startling Danny and Missy. Opening the door, a visibly perturbed Danny found two grave-faced law enforcement officers standing outside. They asked him to confirm his identity and verify if he was the caretaker of a young kitten. Danny seemed baffled by their questions and asked them the purpose of their visit. However, the officers, not interested in indulging him, asked if they could search his premises for the small feline he had brought to the vet's office a few days back. Danny assured them there was no need for a search and readily offered to bring them to the kitten. When he introduced them to Missy, the officers were surprised by his eagerness to cooperate. As they stepped in, they scanned the area with suspicion, noticing only a few scattered feline playthings, which made them reassess their initial assumptions. Believing that the veterinarian might have made a mistake, their concerns were put to rest as soon as they saw Missy and promptly called in for additional support. They asked Danny to step back from Missy and put the kitten into their law enforcement carrier. Danny was understandably upset, but didn't feel he had the leverage to contest this. Only after Missy was safely tucked in the carrier did the officers reveal the shocking truth. Missy, whom Danny had presumed to be a typical stray feline, was in reality an endangered young Mexican bobcat, and owning such a creature was criminalized in the United States. Concerned that Danny would sell the bobcat, The vet had alerted the necessary authorities as soon as he saw the bobcat at his clinic. Danny was taken aback and was filled with sorrow. Having developed a strong emotional connection with Missy, he was even more upset when he learned that his actions could potentially land him in jail. After all was said and done with caring for the bobcat, Danny finally released her back into the wild. Missy was moved to a specialized facility dedicated to rescuing endangered animals. Danny was warned not to bring more animals into the United States without the correct paperwork. Even though Danny and Missy were never reunited, Danny felt relieved knowing Missy was under professional care. How did that story make you feel? Now there's another narrative waiting for us. Let's dive into it. James had been tirelessly looking for his cat, Minky, who had disappeared for almost 3 days. During this period, his concern was so profound that he barely slept. Minky was particularly precious to him. The thought of never seeing his beloved pet again was intolerable. Then one morning, to his enormous relief, Minky came back. However, something was not right. Around Minky's neck was a strange collar that James didn't recognize. Baffled, he swiftly phoned the police. James had cared for Minky for over 3 years. Minky loved lounging in the sunlight and would express her dissatisfaction whenever she was forced to stay indoors for an entire day. If his attention was elsewhere, she would meow persistently by the door. It soon became clear to James that letting Minky roam outside was perfectly safe, as she habitually found her way back home in time for dinner. However, one night, she didn't show up for dinner. Alarmed, James stayed up all night, waiting, but Minky never came back. This was the first time this had ever happened. The possibility of Minky being lost or in danger left James with a sleepless night filled with worry and endless thoughts about potential places Minky might have ended up. His beloved pet was still missing the next day. Filled with fear and worry, James started making calls, hoping to find Minky. He reached out to local animal shelters, asking if anyone had turned in a cat resembling Minky. He provided a detailed description of his pet and requested them to notify him in case Minky showed up. In addition, he prepared flyers and distributed them across the neighborhood to help in the search. Minky was a known face in the neighborhood, and most neighbors had seen her on a daily basis. They all took James's contact details and promised to call him as soon as they spotted Minky. Despite his extensive efforts, James was still unable to locate his missing pet. A pair of days had passed with no trace of Minky, causing James to feel a growing concern that a terrible occurrence might have happened to his cherished feline. This idea was nearly overwhelming for him due to Minky's role as more than just a pet, but also as a consistent companion in James's life. Having no other remaining relatives and never having established a domestic partnership or produced children, James looked to Minky as the closest thing he had to a relative. The possibility of losing this treasured companion was unthinkable. On the subsequent morning, James was awakened by a chain of loud feline cries from below. Groggily opening his eyes, he began to speculate if Minky had made a return or if his mind was just tricking him. Upon hearing another sound from his cat, James leaped from his bed in a state of joy, not pausing to put on his clothes. Fueled by his eager anticipation to reunite with Minky, James rushed down the stairs. Down below, his heart pounded with the expectancy of seeing his pet, and there she was, sitting right in the kitchen. Overwhelmed with a huge wave of relief and happiness, James fell to his knees to greet Minky, with high spirits coming off him in waves. As Minky moved towards him, James responded with a flourish of tender strokes and gentle pats on the cat. It was almost unbelievable. It felt like a divine intervention. However, as James picked Minky up to cradle her, he noticed something odd. There was an unaccustomed firmness in Minky's body. Upon closer inspection, James laid eyes on something on the cat that hadn't been there before, an unusual-looking trap around Minky's neck. James wasn't even sure if it was actually a trap. He attempted to take off the strange object, but Minky was noticeably averse. Whenever James reached for the trap, Minky would nip at his hand, an action she had never exhibited before. James was taken aback when Minky first bit him, and he unintentionally let go of his cat out of surprise. Thankfully, Minky landed safely on her forepaws. This irregular behavior caused James to feel unease, particularly the strange trap Minky was now bearing. Despite the numerous queries flooding his mind, James decided to sideline them for now. The most important thing was that Minky was back. He poured a heap of Minky's favorite tinned meal into a large dish, which Minky consumed rapidly. James pondered over whether Minky had suffered hunger throughout her absence. This thought increased his worries, and he decided to take protective measures. Despite his awareness that Minky might dislike the constraint, James made sure to seal all possible exits from his home to prevent Minky from going missing again. While James was reluctant to upset his cherished animal once more, his interest in the puzzling object around Minky's neck was too compelling to overlook. He resolved to wait until Minky was in a deep slumber before trying to investigate it further. Gingerly, James neared, this time mindful not to come in contact with the object, yet he was still unable to make any concrete determinations. While considering alternative avenues to explore the object without waiting for another Minky sleep cycle, Minky had lured himself back into a profound sleep. In spite of his prior determination, James found himself reaching out once more for a detailed inspection. Yet Minky was aware of his impending approach and was promptly awakened. Preventing James's attempts yet again, Minky appeared to possess an uncanny ability to perceive James's motives. His behavior turned exceptionally uptight and belligerent, creating an impression as if he wanted to dissuade James from meddling with the odd object. James concluded that the only probable approach to place the peculiar white collar on Minky's neck was when the cat was in a deep sleep. He located a benign sleeping aid and subtly blended it into Minky's meal. After Minky had finished his food, James observed him fall asleep. It was at that moment he spotted a red light flickering from the strange collar. This unexpected occurrence startled him, prompting questions about the device's intention and functionality. While his initial feelings were of curiosity, they morphed into unease on witnessing the flickering light. This further augmented his worries about the functions of the device. Anxious about any possible threat from the mysterious device on Minky's collar, James felt an overwhelming obligation as a concerned pet owner to immediately detach it. Upon closer inspection, he noted that the solid part of the collar had a similarity to a camera, with a black dot positioned close to where the red flash had appeared. As he scrutinized further, the device issued another red flash. This reaffirmed his conviction to remove it, with hopes that a label or serial number on the device might shed light on its mystifying existence. Yet, he was met with an obstacle. The device was devoid of any buckle or latch that would facilitate effortless removal. He tried to sever the collar using a pair of kitchen scissors, but it turned out the material was sturdier than anticipated. Upon this realization, he concluded that he needed a more potent instrument to penetrate the thick band. James rummaged through his toolbox and retrieved a pair of end cutters. While not particularly sharp, they appeared to be up to the task of cutting the collar. His deduction turned out to be accurate, as the device was dislodged upon the first try. In the glow of the lamplight, James inspected a small push button on the collar. With a combination of fear and anticipation, he gave it a press. The device let out a beep, followed by an automated voice declaring, "Upload complete." James was dumbfounded, wondering if the collar was indeed internet-enabled and what data had been transmitted. This realization was disconcerting. Every step towards clarity seemed to uncover another puzzle. Given the nature of the data the device might hold, James felt apprehensive, suspecting espionage. To alleviate his doubts, he resolved to take decisive action. He fetched a hammer from his shed. His objective was clear: dismantle the collar, unveil its workings, and understand how it ended up implanted in Minky. Laying the collar on his workbench, he swung the hammer powerfully, smashing the device repeatedly until the outer shell splintered. The impact caused the device to shatter dramatically, scattering its components across the room. Once the onslaught ceased, the innards of the device were visible. The primary component was a camera, which James had expected. In addition, he found a microphone and an antenna within. Despite the alarm bells ringing in his head, he was hesitant about turning to the authorities, unsure if they'd take his discovery seriously. Ultimately, he decided it was best to bring in the police, given the possibility of his privacy being compromised. Explaining in detail about the device's capacity to record and transmit data, The desk officer assured him they'd send personnel to his place right away. To James's surprise, his revelations were met with concern and prompt response from law enforcement. This, quite contrary to his fears of being taken lightly, illustrated the gravity they attached to his situation. Within a short span, the police were at his doorstep, further solidifying their seriousness towards the issue. There was no room for doubt or questioning, which made James wonder if his case was unique or part of a broader agenda. Meeting them at the threshold, he guided them towards the various bits of the destroyed collar. They informed him that there had been numerous complaints about similar collars disappearing from their cats. However, by the time they arrived at the scenes, the collars were always missing. This revelation surprised James. The fact that other pet owners faced similar situations was both alarming and shocking. While the officers assured him of no direct implications, it did little to dismiss his worries. They bagged the pieces of the collar and assured him they'd be in touch with any pertinent information. As the night settled, James's phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. James felt a wave of curiosity wash over him as he answered the ringing phone. The call was coming from none other than the local police department calling to provide an update. After conducting a thorough analysis of the mysterious device, they had successfully determined its rightful owner. James was taken aback by the revelations regarding the owner's intentions. It turned out it wasn't as bone-chilling as everyone had first suspected. The individual behind it all was a young villager, using tracking mechanisms on local area felines as a preliminary test. The youngster had plans to become an entrepreneur in the future, with these tracking tools playing an integral role in his business venture. A sigh of relief washed over James upon realizing the circumstances weren't as treacherous as they initially seemed. Despite still having unanswered questions about the whereabouts of his feline, Minky, during his 3-day absence, James experienced a sense of comfort knowing Minky was back and in no physical danger. That's it for the story today, folks. If you like this, do remember to subscribe and don't forget to hit the like button. Until next time.